In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the upper control arm on this four-wheel drive Chevy Colorado. You want to make sure you have the right one because the two-wheel drive is not only a different procedure, but a different control arm. After this procedure, you will need an alignment performed on the front end, so let's get started. Let's remove the wheel. If your truck has these center caps, remove them with a pry bar. Maybe it has full hubcaps, use a pry bar for that too, or maybe it has nothing at all. Use a 19mm socket to remove all 6 lug nuts. Now you can remove the wheel. Using a 36mm socket, remove the axle nut. Behind that axle nut is a washer that we're going to have to take out. You can use a magnet to try to walk it off. If you have 2 magnets, that's even better. Pull that off, set it aside. Next, you want to make sure the axle pushes through the hub and is not stuck. This one is fine, it moves. From the backside of the brake caliper, you'll see 2 21mm bolts we have to remove so we can get the brake caliper and bracket assembly off of the front knuckle. Leave this one in a couple turns so I can hold it while we remove the upper. Take both off, and now you can pull the caliper right off the rotor. In order to not hang this caliper by the brake hose, I put a bungee cord around it and tied it up to the frame. Using a trim tool, let's remove the ABS wire off of this upper control arm. Just pop the clips off. Further down on the knuckle, there's an 8mm headed bolt that holds this on. Remove it. Optionally, you can remove the wire from the bracket, but I'd like to just remove the bracket. Use a 21mm socket, remove the mounting nut that holds the tie rod stud on the knuckle. Okay. Usually this doesn't just pop free like this. In my case it did, which is great, but sometimes you're going to have to hit the side of the knuckle with a hammer and the vibrations will pop the stud free. Let's undo this upper ball joint, use a 21mm socket and remove the mounting nut. There we go. Leave the mounting nut a few threads on here so that we can tap the knuckle with a hammer and break these two apart without actually having it fly open and, well, the knuckle coming forward really fast. There we go. You can use a pry bar to pry down on the upper control arm. That will allow you to remove the mounting nut that's still on here. And then using this pry bar, you can gently remove the stud from the knuckle and then bring the knuckle forward, push the axle through. There we go. Now if you push the fender liner back, you'll see where the mounting nut is. This is on the rearward side of the upper control arm. This is a 21mm mounting nut. The bolt that goes through on the other side is also a 21mm. We shouldn't necessarily need to hold it, but if you do need to hold it, use a wrench. I'm just going to unthread this mounting nut here. Remove it completely. At this point, this bolt should be able to push through, although I have a feeling it is somewhat stuck in here. I'm going to load it up with some rust penetrant on both sides. Now using a hammer, carefully tap it through. It does help sometimes to put the mounting nut back on a little bit so you can have not only a flat area to hammer on, but you also don't damage the threads this way. There we go. You can typically hammer it quite a bit harder if that mounting nut is on. So now that we know this one breaks free, let's move on to the front one. Then we can worry about removing these bolts completely. Same deal on the front, except on this side, you can most likely use a power tool. Now you can move the control arm all the way up or all the way down, depending on however you need to move it. And inside here, the shock will be in the way, but once you separate the bolt from this little adjustment shim, you can use a chisel right through here between the head of the bolt and that alignment shim. You should be able to pull the bolt out while keeping the shim on the end of the bolt until it all comes off. And if you need to pull on the brake line a little bit, you can bend it, but be very careful, don't bend it too much. And this is how we're going to take this one out. Now the outer shim is stuck on the frame, that's totally fine. I'm going to leave it there, no need for it to come off. We're going to do the same to this one over here. And there is the other bolt. Got it out. Here's this other bolt. Oh. And here's the control arm. Take the upper control arm, make sure the ABS wire is out of the way, and slide it into the frame. You're most likely going to need a rubber mallet to drive it in all the way. That's somewhat lined up. We can adjust as we try to put the bolts in. Let's start with this one on the back, not because we have to, but because it lines up perfectly at the moment. All right. This one's through. Let's put the outer cam in place on the bolt. It does have two tabs that it needs to line up with, so if needed, spin the bolt. This one, the inner one, does not, just the outer does. There we go. Once it's on, I'm going to secure it with the mounting nut. I'm not tightening anything, I just want this here so the bolt doesn't push out anymore as we install the front. Let's get the front through. All right, that's in. All right, poked through the other side. Get this cam on. Once again, might need to spin the bolt. Looks like I got it right. And these are the factory alignment tabs, plastic inserts on these cams, so I'm going to leave them. The alignment professional aligning this vehicle will remove them if necessary. Sometimes it is not necessary for them to be removed, so that's why I'm leaving them on. Let's secure this with the mounting nut. Now before we tighten this fully, we want the control arm to be at right height. That way the bushings are not in a bind, and to do that you basically want it somewhat parallel to the ground. Right about here you could use a pry bar or anything else that you have that'll hold this control arm in place while you torque it down. I'm going to put my pry bar right here, rest the control arm on it. This is basically right height, give or take a little bit. You don't have to get it spot on, you just have to be close. So let's tighten up these bolts. Now at this point we do need to hold the inner bolt with a wrench. This is going to be a 21mm wrench, so that when we tighten the nut on the outside, the cam doesn't spin. I'm going to take my pry bar out because now with one side tightened and the other side mostly tightened, it will stay in place. The torque on these two bolts is 114 foot-pounds. Now what has to happen is the knuckle with the lower control arm have to go up while we pull down on the upper control arm. So I have a pry bar going over this upper control arm onto the frame. That way I'm able to pry down. And then on the lower control arm, I have a pull jack here that I'm gonna potentially raise up on. And if you're on the ground, you could just use a floor jack and press this whole assembly up. So let's put a little bit of pressure on this. And then come down with the upper. have that mounting nut ready so that as soon as you put this together and it goes through, be very careful of any pinch points. Thread that nut on and let go. Now let's tighten up this mounting nut. All right, that's tight right there. If while you're tightening, the whole stud spins, you're gonna use a 6mm Allen socket, stick it right in the middle, hold the stud or spin the stud while you're either turning the nut or holding the nut to make sure that that doesn't happen. 74 foot-pounds is the torque for this mounting nut. All right, that's tight. Now if you have a castle nut with a cotter pin, make sure you continue tightening until you line up the slot in order to properly lock that in. Mine is just a locking nut. Remove any support that you may have installed here. I have a greasable ball joint, so I'm going to add grease to it through the fitting, which if it's not already installed, just thread it on. And you're gonna want to pump it until the boot starts expanding a little bit. Now if you don't have a greasable ball joint, you're all set. You do not need to add any grease to it. All right, that's plenty of grease right there. The boot has expanded, has filled up with grease. And let's reattach the ABS wire bracket up on top of the knuckle. Put the 8mm headed bolt in. That's bottomed out, just a little bit extra, about 1/8 of a turn at most. Resecure the ABS wire on the control arm. There's one retainer on the side and one up on top. Put your tie rod stud back through and install the mounting nut. Let's bottom it out. Torque this to 33 foot-pounds. Take your caliper and slide it over the rotor. Have your bolts ready and let's start them in. Snug these up. Torque these to 133 foot-pounds. Install the washer for the axle nut as well as the axle nut itself, and let's bottom it out. I'm using an air impact, however, when I tighten it, I'm not going to go all the way with it. I'm just going to bottom it out, get it snug. The torque is going to be 191 foot-pounds, and it's important that you tighten this properly. I backed it off a little bit, so let's torque it. To stop the hub from spinning, I'm going to put a pry bar between the lug studs. Once again, 191 foot-pounds. That's it right there. This is a locking nut, so no need to put anything over it. Let's get the wheel back on. Reinstall all 6 lug nuts. We'll bottom them out in a cross pattern. And also in a cross pattern, we're going to torque them to 103 foot-pounds. 103 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Here we go. Double check them all. And whatever style hubcap or center cap your truck had, if it had it, put it back on. Now take it for a road test and don't forget to get an alignment.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.